You're listening to the Win Moon Podcast,
sponsored by Alpha Dow.
Join us every week to listen to up-to-date news on the markets, macro, and the best degenerate stories you can't find anywhere else. Nothing on this show should be taken as financial advice. The opinions spoken here from the hosts and guests are our own personal opinions and should not be taken as financial advice. Now, let's get to the hosts, Clay and Taryn, and get this party started.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Win Moon Podcast. Got a very special guest today, Mr. Jordi Alexander. He is GameTheorizing on Twitter, coming from Singapore. Jordi, appreciate you coming on, giving us a bit of your time.
For sure. I'm excited.
Yeah, I know we both have a little bit of a poker background, and I wanted to start out really quick just asking you, why do you think so many of the current whales and massive traders, they kind of have a lot of them kind of have a poker background? Was curious why is that?
I think there's two reasons. One is like what kind of people get into poker. So usually, when I was college age, it was the smartest kids that were like really, one notch ahead of everybody else, and they would always win in their local games, and they just kind of became professionals because they could just consistently do it. So it was the place where like the young minds that were like one step ahead of everybody else could make the fastest, most money, right? Like how else can you make like millions of dollars unless you grind like, Goldman Sachs for 5 years or something. So, one is like the entry point to get in, like you just have to be like that sharp. And then once you're in, you're also like learning a set of skills that then you can apply to anything involving like risk taking and probabilities. So crypto is very much in that sphere where you really have to think about like probability ranges and tails and like, having like a very good EV mindset. So I think it's both. When you add them up, first you've already really kind of filtered through for like really like the smartest people in their town, in their cities. And then you add on top of that, like years of learning how to think with expected value and really like maximize like your results, and being also like very competitive environment. So when you add those two, I think you just get a lot of successful crypto whales as well.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense actually. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So yesterday had another FOMC meeting. They raised another 75 basis points, which seems like everybody was kind of waiting for that. However, it seems like once Jerome came on, it did get a little bit more hawkish there. And I was curious on your thoughts moving forwards on that. I saw you tweeted that you think like 50 basis points might be a lock for December. However, do you think this kind of moves the market more bullish, or do you think we're still kind of heading towards some rough waters?
Both. So I think we can have some rough waters, but ultimately, I've been saying like we'll probably get some dips, some big dips maybe. I think overall, even though it sounded super hawkish and everything he was saying was hawkish, I think he's overcompensating, and he's overcompensating for the fact that he's being forced to slow down. That was evident by the statement. The statement is kind of like the collective. It's not just him. It's like the whole committee. They have to agree. If they want to be unanimous, they have to make a statement that represents the views. And it's very clear that there's a ton of pressure that this was the last 75. They're done on doing 75. So it doesn't mean they're done raising. Obviously, like we'll get a 50, and then we might get 25, or might get another 50. We don't know after that. For me, it's very clear. I know like I'm the only one saying it, but I can already read the situation. Like it's definitely going to be 50 unless something crazy happens with inflation. It goes back up to 10% or something. But by far the base case now is like they're going to slow down, even if nothing gets better, because they have a lag. So what they're saying is we want to see what we've done so far. We've done 375 in such a short amount of time. Let's actually see what this does. Because on the flip side, if they just keep raising and nothing gets better, why are you even raising? The reality is like interest rates are not a good tool. And I actually was amazed today that, I don't know if you saw the Bank of England, they had their rate decision. They also did 75. So they're now up to 3%. But complete contrast to the Fed, they said the opposite. They said, we're not going to go as high as the market is pricing. We're going to do less. The market is like pricing way too much, because the market was pricing in like 5%, 5.25. And they're saying like, we're not going to get there actually. We're already going to hit a recession next year. and we are doing tax increases, and we're reducing spending. And actually, those two tools are 100 times better than increasing interest rates, which is like this blunt hammer, and you're trying to just like kill a fly with like a hammer. It's just like a terrible way to do it. And actually, once they got rid of Liz Truss in the UK and they replaced her with Sunak, it's been like a night and day. Like they were going to have rate increases forced because they thought about actually like cutting taxes, which is the complete wrong thing to do. So he's coming in and saying, actually, we want to increase taxes, so you don't have to like do all these rate increases, and that's 100 times more appropriate. You really need to slow down the economy with like the fiscal side, not the monetary side. So I think the Fed is just like, they're total clowns, but at the same time, they're going to be forced to slow down. So ultimately, it is bullish because he might talk a tough talk, and he might say, we're going to go higher than people think and longer. But we're not going to know that until like March, because they're going to have to kind of do December. It'll be 50, and then we'll have so much more data. There'll be so much more opportunity for things to slow down. And I think we will get a slowdown. It's already evident in a lot of the data. Like on PMIs, it's very evident already. You see like the survey respondents are already saying like, they're cutting back in every single way. So in my view, we could get dips because he scared everybody. But ultimately, they're going to step down. And by the time they like reevaluate, there'll be like a lot of reasons to slow down.
Yeah. So going back to when you said like, you think we're going to have dips, a couple dips along the way and things like that. Do you think that there's any situations coming up where we might have like pure capitulation again, like some kind of announcements, housing market crashes in America, something like that, and we see like another minus 30 or 50% across the board? Or you think it's just kind of sideways and kind of bleeding off a tad, a couple random rallies? Or is there anything that you think could cause like another mass capitulation type event?
Definitely on the equity side, there is. So crypto, I think, has delevered quite a lot already, and I think it will outperform if there's further downside. I mean, to be clear, my base case, yeah, it's like sideways chop, a little bit down. And then kind of, there'll be some rallies in there, especially like as we get to data that verifies that they have to slow down. There is maybe like a 20% chance of an accident. And when I say an accident, I'm looking mainly, I've talked a lot about treasury market. I starting to see signs of a liquidity in the treasury market. Obviously, we saw in the UK how that spiraled at some point. And the whole reason they changed their entire government was because the treasury market was falling apart, and like nobody was buying 30-year gilts, and pensions were getting illiquid. So there's a chance that happens as well. So they made a decision a few days ago not to buy like certain buybacks that they were thinking about doing on treasuries. They have these like 20-year auctions that nobody wants to buy because they're very liquid. People care a lot about liquidity right now. So I would say, given the tough talk by Powell, which I think was kind of a mistake, I think they've opened the door for maybe a 20% chance of a proper financial accident where we have some, solvency issues or just very deep liquidity issues in the treasury market. Will force them to step in.
Right. What do you think kind of would be the narrative for the next, like, full on risk on bull run to start again? I mean, the last bull run we had was kind of unprecedented. We had the COVID, we had, I think just here in America, Trump in one term printed like $9 trillion. We had stimulus, we had things like that. Moving forwards, do you think that can ever be replicated? Or, what do you think would kick off the next bull run, I guess?
Yeah, I think there's only like one more major bull run like we saw, in 2020, 2021. There's only one left. When you look at kind of like the adoption cycles and like how big adoption has already gotten, I think there's one last big push. And that push, in my mind, comes in where people are looking at crypto as a solution, not just as like a, we can get like a mini bull runs, obviously, like just some speculation here and there, as people get like extra cash. If there's like UBI, people get checks in the mail, young people will buy crypto, right? Like that's fine. But if you want like a proper bull run, like we saw like a 10x kind of event, it'll have to come from general population starting to say, look, like, I don't like fiat. I don't like what the government's doing, this whole system. I like kind of like an alternative, and there's like a push towards crypto as a use case, as in like an alternative to that system, and that has like a lot of legs, and that could be massive. Um, so we've already reached the point of like 9-figure users, like hundreds of millions of crypto users around the world. So there's only like 8 billion people. There's one last big push, and I think it comes in when people are looking at it for a solution to some of the fiat problems. Uh, it's not imminent. The dollar first has to go through a crisis, and the way I see it playing out is the U.S. government at some point will get a lot of popular push to start spending a lot again, because we'll end up in a recession, and then people will vote for the guy, whether it's Trump or whoever, who's going to just spend their way out of the recession. And that's going to cause a dollar crisis. Because right now, even for the countries that, Turkey has 85% inflation. It just came out today, and they're not doing anything about it. So they need an alternative. Obviously, there's a lot of crypto being used in that country, but they can even use stable coins. Like they don't need ETH or Bitcoin. They can just buy USDC. They're protected because right now the dollar is performing well. If you get a full on, dollar crisis where that's the last bastion of fiat, then potentially you see that, but I don't think it's imminent.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of adoption, I did want to touch base on Elon taking over Twitter, buying Twitter. He was kind of memeing Doge for a while. Do you think he's actually going to implement Doge in some way? Do you think, I saw Jason Moe, I follow him on Twitter, I'm sure you know him. He kind of made a tweet that even so, this would take years to play out. And then on the other side, you have someone, mega well, very well respected, GCR, for example. He kind of thinks that, for example, the Doge play would be to never implement it. And Elon just keeps kind of randomly tweeting some type of meme thing and kind of hyping it up. Have you given any thought about Doge or anything like that in your portfolio, possibly?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting puzzle piece, right? Doge has a lot of opinions, and it's a very interesting coin. Even GCR, I've seen him be very bullish on it. I've seen him be very bearish on it. He's always kind of considered to be like the pure meme coin. So he's been like very bullish in a lot of circumstances. I've seen him, but then he's shorting it now, and he's saying like the ratio to like Shiba should converge back, and he's been making money on the short side.
Right.
When it comes to like how Elon is going to play with Twitter, I can't see a way where like Doge becomes a central part of it. It could just be, it could be like an honorary title, like in the UK, there's like a king, but doesn't do anything. It's just it's just a sort of like a name, right? And he could place it in a place on the app where it's prominent, and it could get utilized if somebody wants to use it. But I don't think nobody will be forced to use it, because that will just destroy the value proposition. Not everybody finds it so hilarious or such a good idea. So, I do think there is, as we've discovered in this last cycle, like one of the learnings that there is such a thing as like meme value. And it's basically attention value. It's like attention is scarce. And if something is powerful enough of an idea of a meme, or funny enough that it just gets like, tens of millions of people to congregate their attention on it, that has value somehow. Like, how does that translate exactly? It's usually, some people in the community will try to create something around it, and then other people will use it. And so that's kind of what we're seeing right now with Twitter. Elon's creative. He thinks outside the box. I don't respect everything that he's doing, but I do expect that we'll see some headlines, and we'll have some pumps, and they'll probably get faded again. I'm not a big believer that like in 10 years, Doge will be like another currency that's like, a world leading thing. But, I don't mind playing it long sometimes if it looks like there's going to be some catalysts.
Yeah, for sure. I did want to go back to the last bull run we just had. Rebase coins were a pretty big thing. We had Ohm. I guess they were kind of the first ones. Then you had like Butterfly, Redacted Cartel in those, and then even Luna. And I've been following you for quite a while, and Luna, I actually took your advice. I believe I exited my position. What made you kind of catch on to those that like, hey, these are 100% going to collapse? Do you think the rebase thing is kind of over after these collapses of, Ohm and Time and Butterfly and things like that?
I think there were certain things that were like a lack of education of retail, and so it's not that rebasing itself is like huge issue. If people understand what it is and what it's doing, there's good reasons to rebase. We have an NFT project that just launched recently, the Art Gobblers. I don't know if you've read about how it works, but it's basically like you have this goo token, which is like constantly rebasing and inflating away, and kind of exponentially, and it's a very clever part of a dynamic where it's creating incentives. It's allowing you to spend it, but then it's not such a big deal if you spend it because it'll rebase, so you'll catch up, and you'll still have more goo. It's not like you run out of it. So it's kind of encouraging both a spending and it's encouraging like the economic incentives that you want to do. So rebasing in itself was fine. Now, when you start saying you have 80%, 300%, 4,000% yield,
Right.
where it's just rebasing, and people are thinking that like there's a chance the price stays steady, and I actually get like a 40x on my money because like the price might stay steady, when actually obviously it's getting diluted like exponentially as soon as anybody spends it. That was part of the problem with that I had with Olympus. It was really built upon an idea that it's going to be like a new base money, and that's such a difficult thing to do. I mean, we can get into like some of the other people who are trying to do that, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, but the idea that you can just use speculation and just spin something up into like trillions of dollars of like base money is misguided. And I took offense to like some of the way that they were presenting like the safety of it, and like this is this is like a secure financial instrument. I wasn't a big fan of that. And when it comes to Luna, there was something that bugged me, and I feel a little bit bad because I feel like I had a platform, and I was one of the people that was being listened to, where I explained how it could go wrong, and I thought it would most likely go wrong. But it was only after the fact that I gave it like one night I just stayed up the whole night during while it was crashing, like I think on the 12th of May or something, and I really just tried to piece it all together, like why exactly is this happening? And I realized it was actually inevitable. And if I had done this like a month before, if I had allocated like a full day of my time, I would have like properly been able to kind of explain why it was completely inevitable. And haven't seen anybody talk about it. I've tried to say it, but after the fact, it doesn't matter anymore. But actually, the reason why it was inevitable was that the mechanic was flawed, where it allowed you to, do something that you're not supposed to be able to do, which is like buy low, sell high, and just keep repeating that. So if you look at carefully, like what was happening, like jump trading, for example, was like one of the very supporters that was market making it, and they were making a lot of money on the conversion of Luna to UST. So they were kind of like every day really doing most of that volume on that conversion. And all they need to do to just print money is like manipulate the exchange rate, because it's just there's an oracle that's kind of using the exchange rate where you go back and forth. And all they need to do is just like, push the price down a little bit on Luna. And then, they can kind of convert into Luna from UST, and they can get a lot of Luna, and then they can pump the price up, and then they can just kind of convert. And that's what they've, I don't want to make any kind of judgments or anything else, but let's just say that the mechanic allowed that. So regardless of like who was purposely trying to do that or not, doesn't matter. This mechanic allowed people to just endlessly create, more UST. And what that means is that the treasury or the backing of UST just is like an empty hole. You can never fill it up. You can say like, I'm going to buy Bitcoin, and then maybe Bitcoin goes up 3x, and that might work for a while, but then like, this thing just keeps chipping away at you. And eventually like you'll be back to like not being backed at all, no matter what Bitcoin does. Like it's just a constant mechanic problem. So, yes, they got a little bit unlucky with like Bitcoin not performing well. And that's why it maybe didn't go like another year. If Bitcoin had tripled, it would have probably like lasted like another couple of years maybe. But ultimately, like this was a core thing. And this thing about crypto, man, like no one's like figured it out. Like it took me like a lot of time to figure it out, and it's still like no one seems to be like understanding that this was really at the core of the problem. Like you hear SBF describe it, and he says some smart things about like it was a volatile asset backed by a non-volatile. You can't have like this pairing of like a volatile asset back, but there's a lot more to it. And I guess my main learning is like we're still early because no one knows what they're doing. It's so obvious to me that I look for people who can teach me, and then oftentimes I have to just figure stuff out myself because it's no one's saying like the full story.
Yeah. Do you think a guy like Do Kwon, I mean, obviously he's super, super sharp, really intelligent guy. Do you think, I mean, he actually knew this was going to happen? Do you think the whole, I'll bet you 10 or $20 million with GCR was just kind of kind of like a psyops to make it look like he really believed in it? Or do you think this was kind of just without calling him out, obviously, do you think this was kind of just like a really well orchestrated way to make $1 billion,
I don't think he was scamming. I think he was fully drinking the Kool-Aid in every single possible way. I don't think that he understood. It sounds weird, like how does a founder not understand every single thing about what they're creating? But I found that in many cases, even with Olympus, you have Zeus and like he's figured out certain pieces, but I felt like I could kind of go even further than the founder on like actually understanding the actual mechanics and the maths of it. And I think Do Kwon he's incredible at this like being like a meme leader of a community and like pushing BD. Like the BD that they were doing was really impressive. They were getting partnerships with everybody, and he made a lot of friends in high places that were supporting him, and they almost saved him, although they they didn't want to put the final $1 billion to save him again. But it doesn't mean that he understands all the aspects, and frequently in crypto you might need to understand finance and economics and game theory and psychology and a lot of other things, not just BD. And I think his Twitter persona probably was also a little bit of like an act where he just kind of he has to feed the community. He kind of sees he's getting reinforced. It's maybe not like naturally him, but you log into Twitter every day, and if you do A, nobody cares. But if you do B, like you have like thousands of adoring fans, and so you start dumping on people and shitting on them, and talking smack, and you just kept getting reinforced. So I think he's not necessarily like, he's probably a bit more of a humble guy, and he just got carried away on this like wild thing, and I think he fully believed that it was going to work.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. I wanted to spend the majority of time for this podcast on Bitcoin versus ETH and just Bitcoin in general. I know you have a big debate coming up, I believe tomorrow, actually. So yeah, I just kind of want to get your thoughts. So I'm an old school kind of Bitcoin guy, got in around 2013. I was pretty much a Bitcoin maxi for quite a while. And now we have, tens of thousands of coins or whatever. Most likely only a few have some real world use cases. The rest of them just kind of scams. I'm not a full on Bitcoin maximalist. I do think it is getting a bit toxic. However, it's kind of like that on both sides. You see ETH guys doing the same thing now. What do you kind of think about the future of Bitcoin with its leaders, the kind of toxic stuff going around where, if you touch anything else, if you look at anything else, you're an idiot and blah, 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 what do you kind of think about this culture that's happening right now?
I mean, like you said, you have a lot of Bitcoin for a long time. I know people who have a lot of Bitcoin around the world. They've been like steeped in it for years. They're not the kind of people that you're seeing, on Twitter talking shit about everybody who's touching any other coin. So it's a subculture. And I would say like, I don't even like calling it like maximalism, Bitcoin maximalism. I think it is a little bit degrading given that it was, Vitalik came up with that. And it's also like not very descriptive. So let's call it like there's Bitcoin orthodoxy, which is a good description. And I thought I came up with the term, but then I heard Nick Carter use it. So it actually seems to kind of be like a universal way to describe that there's this kind of holding on to like the original belief about Bitcoin and not progressing and using the learnings that we've had over the years. So just as you have, you have like in religion, you have like kind of orthodox parts of a religion that are just doing like the really old school like beliefs, and they're doing all the culture and they'll kind of bash anybody who diverges even a little bit from like the prescriptive path. So there's a group there. I would say like I'm not as negative on this group as you'll see kind of, a lot of people bash them, because I do think that they, as like with religion, they understand something very core, which is there is like a truth that they're defending. And I share that truth. So I think the reason why they're so defensive about it and they're so toxic, like it looks toxic in some way, is because like they're maybe not understanding exactly like where the boundaries of that truth is. And the truth that I'm referring to is like, scarcity is like at the core of everything. And if for anything to like work and to like have any organization on a human level, there has to actually be scarcity, because if you're just copy pasting it and you're forking it and there's another one, like the value does go to zero. So this like fundamental truth, they understand it like very deeply. And so I respect that. And I don't want to bash like people who are defending this like very profound truth. So that's good. Then, they start to get delusional, a lot of them, and they start saying like everything else is a scam. There's no other use case. And yet there are scams out there. So it's easy for them to kind of say like, Shiba Inu or whatever thing is useless and it's just like a speculative asset. But then at the same time, you have this like overlap with securities. And it's true that a lot of cryptos are securities because, they kind of have cash flows and they're trying to give the cash flows of dividends to users. And while like a lot of people might say like, this is a problem with the SEC and the SEC is going to kind of clamp down on securities because they have to, protect investors, it doesn't change the fact that they have traits of securities. That's probably a good thing because it allows people around the world to get access to cash flows and, make investments and kind of be like in a community. So everything that has a cash flow, I would classify as like legitimate, all of it, like anything that really is trying to provide a service, whether it's just a DEX, it's providing a service. It's allowing you to swap two assets. Anything of that nature, I do consider it to be legitimate. Now, it doesn't mean those things can't be overvalued because, maybe there's 20 million DEXs and like, what is special about this one? Okay, maybe Uniswap has like, this extra like liquidity, et cetera. So then you have to value them. But I wouldn't say that they are scams. I would never view it that way. And it's clear that Ethereum is not a scam because there's a lot of people who are using gas because they want to do stuff, right? So that fundamentally makes it not a shitcoin and it makes it not a scam. Where it gets tricky is, this concept of scarcity. When we go to like what is base money and what does it actually mean, it's so difficult to have people keep for indefinite periods of time their wealth in a cryptocurrency or in any kind of good, unless they're very sure or very confident that in 5 10 years somebody will buy this off of me. Otherwise, they'll just sell it now and they'll get into fiat or they'll buy real estate or whatever. Because why would they want to keep it in something that they're not sure somebody will be around? So it's such a high bar. We're talking about people's lives. Like, if you're going to hold this thing for 10 years and you're going to like have your children's education fund in it, you really like want to defend it, and you have to be confident that this thing will have buyers in the future. And you can't have that when everyone is like forking it and making a new one, and then we change our minds and oh yeah, that was sound money, and now it's like ultrasound money, and then 5 years later, like someone comes up with like exponential sound money or whatever, right?
Okay.
So there's something very like unique about Bitcoin, and it has to do with the origin, which is like almost religious to an extent. You have the Virgin Mary and you have this like incredible thing. It's not very different than the story of like Satoshi anonymously, like nobody knows, maybe the CIA knows, I don't know, but no one's kind of figured out. There's just this mythical figure who's not touched billions of dollars that has just been sitting in some wallet. You can't make this shit up. Like somebody could make billions of dollars by just selling their Bitcoin if they were so predisposed. So you have something of like this like magical birth. So you have two things. One is, Satoshi actually was the first one to really solve the trilemma and like have miners kind of create that incentive where they're getting paid to secure the network and they're like a neutral third party and create this ecosystem of cryptocurrency that we have today. So there's the kind of like the creation, and then there's like the lore of he hasn't touched it. Either he's dead, he's just given this gift to mankind, and then he's gone up in the sky, or maybe he's alive, but like he believes in this to an extent where he'll just leave billions of dollars and like not touch it because he really believes in this. So either way, doesn't matter. It's one of the two, but either way, that's like something very powerful, and it's so powerful that it has by far the best shot of being like a Schelling point in 10 years, 20 years, where like, people that are just born today and, in 20 years time, they'll read about it and they'll be like, okay, like, this is important, right? Like this needs to get defended. And I want to own this thing and I want to be a part of this. So you can't replicate that. Like, it doesn't matter what you design and you're going to burn and you're going to rebuy and then you're going to have MEV, like that stuff is like unique. And it doesn't even matter if there's a toxic community that starts to form around certain pieces of it, because they're not Bitcoin, they're not Satoshi. Like it's just one of the communities that is part of this thing, but they don't dictate like, what Bitcoin is or what Bitcoiners should be doing. They can have their view and that's fine. So, for me personally, why I would say I'm a Bitcoiner is I care about human organization. And for us to organize as a society, it's a lot of game theory to overcome because everyone is incentivized on a personal level. Prisoner's dilemma, everything else. You always have people, they look at their own box, like what's my payoff? And it's a lot of perfect things have to come together where you get enough of organization that overcomes that. And I think Bitcoin really has something unique that no other cryptocurrency will ever be able to have because of the genesis of it. And so we have to respect that. Otherwise, crypto just becomes like a shit show of pumping it and selling it and pumping it and selling it and just trying to time it, which is, maybe that's fun, but it's not going to change the world.
Yeah, I did want to ask, what is your personal outlook on Bitcoin's future? And I'm talking 10 plus years out, a decade plus out. I kind of saw the game theory back in the day when I first started reading about it, late 2013, like I said. I actually did think that nations might start buying it, potentially even adopting it, things like that. Now we've kind of seen it a little bit. I mean, it still is early. We see some game theory starting here, especially when you have nations in conflict and things like that. Maybe certain things don't want to use the dollar anymore. Now I'm kind of leaning towards, and let me know if you don't think this is correct. I'm kind of leaning more on eventually you might see things like oil, gas, things like that settled with Bitcoin. Maybe places don't want to use the dollar anymore or things like that. How do you kind of see Bitcoin playing out next 10 plus years or something like that? I know it's hard to toss out an accurate prediction, but
I mean, I don't think that we'll see like a major country ever adopt Bitcoin. There's a lot of reasons why they would never do that.
Right.
They will always want to control their own currency, and maybe a country as big as a 5 million country or maybe 10 million people. That's kind of like the max. They might use it in instead of a dollar or something, where they have to kind of latch on to like one of the big boys, and instead of choosing like the yuan or something else, maybe at some point like some of the small ones will choose Bitcoin. But I would say the experiment of having centralized institutions adopt it hasn't really played out that well, if we're being kind of objective about it. And I think one of the things we're learning is maybe it is more of a sovereign individual tool rather than a nation state or a large institutional tool. Now institutions can get involved, obviously, that Fidelity can custody it for their retail users who want to have a part of this. But I don't foresee that hyper Bitcoinization in sense of like the only currency in the world will be Bitcoin will really happen.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why it can't happen. It's not just one reason. There's multiple, starting from even like the distribution of Bitcoin. There's a weird game theory dynamic where people don't want to sell. So you can shake out the weak hands. And I think a lot of the cycles, what they do is they do kind of increase the distribution of Bitcoin, because it's easy to hold on if it's just up only. Like if Bitcoin is every single year is going up, why would the Winklevi like sell any of their Bitcoin? They have enough to live. They can just watch this thing like expand into like the next 50 years. So it takes like going up to 100K and then going back down to 10K to put like a bit of like fear in the whales' hearts, to be like, okay, you should maybe take some off the table because this thing can go down like 90%. And actually like them selling is good for the long run, because it allows like new users to come in. And then the more people who have it, the more like political support there is, and the more kind of like societal push there is to like adopt it. So Bitcoin can have a smooth ride by definition, because like, the whales are not going to distribute it, and that will make too few holders. Nation states need to have their fiat. And then, we have to kind of look at what is it going to be. I mean, you brought up the dollar. So the dollar is something that we've taken for granted for like the last, 40 years as its role. I would say we're entering a very interesting time period now, where you have rising powers like China, who are very anti-dollar, and they have collaborators that are pissed off with the United States, like Russia, who are also trying to de-dollarize as much as they can, and potentially the Middle East as well, parts of the Middle East at least, not all of it. And so, yeah, things like you mentioned, like oil or other things. I don't know that Bitcoin is going to be like one of the first currencies to get used, but obviously they're trying to use other currencies instead of the dollar, and it's possible that Bitcoin eventually has a role to play as a, just imagine a world where like every country, across the world, 2% of the population are like Bitcoiners, right? So you have, what Balaji calls like a digital nation, where everyone's like in different places, but on the internet, they're actually like a nation in a way. Like they have a core set of beliefs, they have a common, language or religion of Bitcoin, let's say. So that could be a powerful thing. And having 2% of every country might be enough of a reason for certain things to get priced in that asset, because that no matter where you go, there'll be some of those people.
Right. Going back to Bitcoin's future, there's kind of it's been going on for a while, but it's kind of back on the mainstream now about Bitcoin's future as far as security. We see, example, low Bitcoin prices, high energy prices. We see miners capitulating, things like that, going totally bankrupt. I think it was Core Scientific the other day. It looked like it dropped like 40% in a day. Yeah, what do you think is going to happen with that? People are saying that's just not sustainable right now. Are they right, or is it kind of somewhere in the middle and this can be worked out?
I mean, there's two separate things. So the miner industry, and like whether that goes through cycles and boom bust cycles, and some of them go bankrupt, is not a big deal actually. Like it doesn't really matter. And energy prices don't matter, because that doesn't like interfere with security. The core thing is security here. So
Right.
if energy prices goes up, then it's expensive for an attacker to attack the network. It kind of linearly like makes it more expensive for somebody to get 51% of the network and do a double spend or whatever they want to do with it. So that itself is not a problem. The problem is the way Bitcoin is designed is that you have these halvings, and the halvings are actually like they are the security budget. So right now we have a pretty high security budget. It's fine. After 4 halvings, every time the percentage of the network that gets printed is so small that you can imagine, in 2030s, 2040s, and then even worse going forward, you're going to have so few Bitcoin get mined that there's not a lot of incentive for miners to validate transactions. Now, Satoshi had initially believed that there would be enough block usage and that would pay the miners. And so like eventually, he's like, yeah, like the security budget's going to go down when it comes to block rewards, but it'll go up because of usage, and everyone, the whole world's going to be using it. And so like it'll even out, and there will always be a security budget. But we're seeing very strong signs that people are not using Bitcoin for transactions, or using it as a store of value. And that completely changes the security budget, because if they're not going to just keep making transactions back and forth and paying their coffee with it, giving money to miners, very soon in like three or four halvings, the security budget will be so small that the economics of like running a mining company are not going to be good. And so, that will allow a nation state to just say, well, the free market isn't spending more than $200 million of energy. I can spend 300 million and just like, swap this bug away that I don't want to deal with, like, Bitcoin in my country. So that is a real concern. And a lot of the non-Orthodox Bitcoiners are aware of this. And I think, some of them are very worried, and they might have, hedged their bets with Ethereum and kind of lost belief because of this. And the Orthodox people, they don't even like acknowledge this problem. Maybe they say that, oh, well, Lightning is gonna be amazing, and then that'll somehow, like, if everyone's using Lightning and that like gets kind of checked in, then that'll still be enough for miners. That's theoretically possible, but that hasn't been, that theory has not been validated, let's say. So you have this gap of like what's going to happen, and it's a legitimate concern. I think it's too early to solve it because there's not enough urgency yet. We'll have urgency and we'll solve it when we're close to the problem. And you can see, like, humans, we really just look at the next problem. We don't look at problems 10 years out. You see it with global warming. You see it with like making like mRNA vaccines, where it took like an actual, full blown like global pandemic for people to just say, okay, like, let's just get this vaccine thing done. And then, they figure it out in 6 months when they haven't figured out in 20 years. So similarly, in the 2030s, as we get closer to like the mining budgets being lower, the Bitcoin community will come to this crisis moment, and they will have to coordinate. The problem with trying to do it now and trying to solve this problem now is a lot of people have their head in the sand. And, it's still been like only 5 years since the Bitcoin Cash, kind of like the big block fork. And you have to appreciate history. And having a historical event like that, what it does is it reinforces Bitcoiners to not support any change, especially like radical change, which is like the 21 million meme, which they have to give up. So it's too soon to impose this upon them, because there's no urgency yet. They're still kind of like, hoping on Lightning or something else. And it's only 5 years since they've had to like defeat a change. My personal belief is that, ultimately there will have to be tail emissions to save Bitcoin, and people will see that when it's really starting to become a problem.
That was going to be my next thing I was going to bring up to you, because I can't remember if it was a tweet or a podcast that you did, but you did speak about the tail emissions. And at first, just hearing about it, I was one of those Bitcoin people who, this is no. But then the more I started thinking about it, it does make sense. And can you kind of explain, for the people that are going to be listening, what exactly you do mean by that, and what that entails, and how that would, benefit Bitcoin moving forwards in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it is a growing belief, and you'll see like the people who really go through the rabbit hole as they're more advanced on Bitcoin, they all start to eventually get to this understanding. So, I'm by no means the only one that's brought this up or believes,
Right.
that this is going to be a forced solution. And I understand, your reaction that you described, and I understand other people's reaction, because it feels like the important thing is the scarce supply. As we talked about before, scarcity is the key of it. And, we've told everybody and our grandma, there's 21 million.
21
and we
forever,
don't want to
yeah.
we don't want to look dumb and be like, oh, there's 22 now, and people make fun of us. And there's like a lot of reaction, and I get it. Like, it's a big thing to give up. But, if you go deeper, you realize, first of all, something has to happen. And secondly, like, we're not actually giving up that much, because, the scarcity can still be maintained. there is a tweak that has to get made, and you can't keep making tweaks because part of the appeal of Bitcoin is it has predictable monetary policy, and the predictability of it is like a huge advantage over like Ethereum, which keeps changing every like 2 years. And so like having a fundamental change of tail emissions is a cost to pay in terms of narrative, right? And I understand it, and it's a little bit like tough to deal with. But you either let it die, and some people might just be wanting to let it die, and those guys can maybe go down with the ship. And we'll talk about maybe what that means if some people don't agree, and like how that might play out. But ultimately, the whole point is that you have a security budget. Otherwise, like you're not censorship resistant, and Ethereum has kind of solved it because it does have a lot of usage. So people do burn gas, and there is that like security budget that is brought about. Bitcoin is just designed on a certain assumption that's it's incorrect, and it's not like Satoshi is God. Like he couldn't get everything right, and he couldn't foresee that it's going to be used less of. He called it electronic cash. He thought it was going to be cash. That's not really like what's happening. So just like Litecoin. The thesis of Litecoin was that it was going to be the digital silver to the digital gold. And then, for 5-6 years, people believe that maybe there's a reason for that because it's cheaper. It has, 1/4 of the security, and there's more coins. So, and that, we've tested that theory, and we've learned that nobody needs digital silver. Like there's no usage of it. It doesn't add anything to the equation. So similarly, like we're learning things every cycle, right? Like we're learning through real world usage. Because there's a difference between writing a white paper about electronic cash and then having like 20 years of actual adoption and seeing where it goes. And we'll have to do something. And I don't see that there's any like fundamentally alternative way to create a sustainable budget. And I think it's not a big deal. Like ultimately, it supports what I'm saying in terms of distribution, because it prevents hoarding to some extent. If there's going to be like, let's say like 1% or 0.5%, I think it should be in that region. That the tail emission should be between 0.5% and 1%. That's kind of like creating enough new coins to get distributed around. The miners will buy some energy and they'll sell it, and some other people will get it. That it's actually beneficial for the network. And the fact that there's like a tiny bit of dilution is so small compared to like, what happens with fiat, where you get like 8% a year. And I think it's an acceptable price to pay to have this instrument.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the more I started kind of looking into it, and once I got over my own bias of, like we said, it's 21 million, this is it, it does. It makes a lot of sense. And for someone like myself who I believe in Bitcoin, I want it to keep going. I mean, there has to be something in the future, like you said, that just keeps it sustainable and running, and that way it doesn't collapse on itself. And Satoshi, even being the genius he was, like you said, I mean, he's not Nostradamus. He can't predict everything, and going back to usage, actually, that's actually something I wanted to talk about. I've been having lots of discussions with a lot of my buddies who are way more intelligent than I am, and they are starting to turn way more bullish on Ethereum as far as returns, price, things like that, than Bitcoin. And the main reason is nobody uses Bitcoin. I mean, myself, I have coins that are just sitting in a Trezor for years. I do accumulate, but I don't use it ever. They just sit there, and things like Ethereum and Solana or whatever, like I'm using it all the time. I'm sending USDC, I'm doing NFTs, I'm minting things. So how do you see this playing out? And do you think the flippening, I know that is a big thing. I never thought that it would actually happen. And now I'm really starting to believe, maybe it's just from so many people around me saying it, but I'm really starting to think that is very, very possible.
I mean, you have two things. One is the usage, and the other one is the tokenomics, which are or Ponzi-nomics. Depends which angle you see it. But Ethereum has all these improvements that they've made over the years that make holding the asset, a good shot at getting increased value. Because even if nothing happens, people are like burning. They're using it, and some of it gets burnt, doesn't go to miners anymore. So if you go back to what we're talking about at the beginning in terms of like individual incentives and how those add up to like a game theory community, if I have two choices today and I can buy Bitcoin and I can buy Ethereum, if Ethereum has this superior tokenomics, as an individual, forgetting philosophy, forgetting trying to help the world, coordinate everything else, if I'm just looking at myself, I might say like, I want to buy this thing that keeps burning the supply, and like I'm just gonna like have an increasing amount of the network without doing anything. And that's like a very strong puzzle piece that is against Bitcoin in favor of Ethereum. The other one, like you mentioned, is like you can do something with it. I think this will change. I think there are hardcore Bitcoiners that are not like these. Honestly, like if we had left everything to like the orthodox people, Bitcoin would die. But there are a lot of hardcore Bitcoiners that are like us, that are like you look at like Cosmos blockchain. There is a lot of like even Osmosis, like some of the founders of like a lot of the Cosmos chains, they are like hardcore Bitcoiners. And ultimately, if we start having an environment where you can use your Bitcoin, and I think like technology is getting to that point where you can have like very safe, trustless bridges. I'm not talking like BitGo where you get wrapped Bitcoin, but you're kind of relying on a centralized party. You can freeze it. I'm talking like layer 0, finding a way where you can just have it on Cosmos, and then you can actually use it as collateral. You hear Michael Saylor talk about it, like pristine collateral, and it is pristine collateral. It's a neutral, scarce digital asset that has the strongest selling point. You have to actually be able to use it as collateral. You have to be able to say like, I'm going to keep all my wealth in Bitcoin, and that's fine because I can take a loan against it. I can like buy a house and use it as collateral. I can do stuff and keep my wealth in it without needing to transfer the wealth out in order to buy something or borrow something or do something. You have to be able to use it as collateral, and that won't happen if it's just sitting on its own chain. So I think like ultimately a bet against Bitcoin is a bet against human innovation. And, that's a dumb bet to make. I think there's motivated Bitcoiners who are building stuff. They'll create ways that eventually you can start incorporating Bitcoin into DeFi. And that's very close. I don't think it's years in the way. I think it's, in the next few years, we will see ways where you can use trustless Bitcoin, whether it's on, Atom ecosystem or other ecosystems, like maybe even Ethereum. That's fine. I think we'll see some of those opportunities, and you will be able to do things with your Bitcoin. But right now it's a strong problem. Like it is just sitting there right now. It's waiting for it to get unlocked.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one right now. What do you think about the whole, ETH, ultrasound money, things like that? What do you put the percentages of a flippening at? And do you think if there is a flippening, the hypothetical case, do you think that's good or bad for the market? Do you think it matters? Or do you think if Bitcoin loses that number one spot, we can actually see it go down to 3, 4, 5, things like that? Once that narrative of like, it's been the king forever is just kind of gone.
I don't think the flippening is the end of the story. There can be a flippening, reflippening, re-reflippening, depending on like what economic environment is best suited for different assets. I think Bitcoin and Ethereum are fundamentally like very different assets. Bitcoin is just kind of like this coordination point for like store value. Ethereum is kind of like this, smart contract ecosystem where there are proponents of it being used as money in that ecosystem. And it kind of makes sense when you look at their individual incentives, because, if they're all in on this thing, of course, they want the value to go up as much as possible, and they want the monetary premium. Because if you look at just the equity premium, like if you Ethereum as just kind of like a company, and you look at how much revenue it gets, it's not that much. Like it doesn't justify a $200 billion valuation. There's maybe a couple $1 billion or so, like, being actually spent on it every year, which is like the revenue, you could say. So there is like a chunk of monetary premium already priced in. So you can see, like, if they're hoping that it keeps going up, they want to become money. There is a fundamental lack of education, I feel like, in that community as to what it takes to be money. They just assume that it's hyper, ultrasound, and that's
Right.
the most important thing, is like the inflation rate. They don't understand the most important thing is like the coordination point, and why is there a coordination point around it, and what's the story why like this is unique and is scarce, and nobody can just make a better version. And Ethereum has a little bit of a chance because it has such a large mind share, and it was like the first major smart contract platform. But the difference between gold and Bitcoin, which is like massive, you have a digital asset versus like an asset that you need to store in, under your bed or something, and you can't verify it, and you can't transfer it, and you can't easily break it up and send it around. Bitcoin is such a 0 to 1 improvement over existing technologies, where Ethereum, you could say, is like a 1.1 because it allows you to do a few more things with it. But that's not enough of a selling point to be like, okay, like this is the money now, and this deserves to be money. And there is a term that I've coined called earned ownership. Like, you've earned the ownership. And I think with seigniorage, which is kind of, seigniorage means when like money gets created, like a new form of money gets printed, someone is making other people poorer, because they're kind of saying like, this is money, I can now buy your stuff. This money didn't exist 5 minutes ago. I've printed it, and now I'm just going to come buy your house with this money. That's like seigniorage. This is like a very powerful concept. So, the Fed, the US Treasury, like they control the levers around like the US currency, and which I think ultimately like will lead to the downfall of the dollar, because they will abuse their seigniorage too much at some point to satisfy the local population with like their demands. But the concept of seigniorage is a key philosophy in money, because if I'm going to say like, I'm going to buy your stuff with this money that I've created, you have to earn it. Like, what has made you earn my house? You just came up with like a 1.1 better technology, and now like you're just going to buy all my stuff. Like, it doesn't work that way. And I think nobody in the Ethereum ultrasound money camp understands that this is the reality of how things work. And the concept of earned ownership really has to come through society and psychology, and like a shared, belief in a just world, that this is fair. And, there's a certain story to be said for Bitcoin having seigniorage, and a certain story for ETH. And when you compare them, there's a clear advantage on Bitcoin. I think over like years that will start to play out, because the concept of like, why should somebody who has a lot of Bitcoin be able to like, buy everything I own? You can make some argument where it's like, this was a 0 to 1 technology. Somebody invented it. A Bitcoiner invented this technology. It's making the world a better place. It's allowing humans to coordinate and create a digital nation across the world. And so like, they've earned a certain amount of money, whether it's 5 billion for having that Genesis block, even though he's not ever going to use it. Nobody would say like, yeah, Elon deserves 200 billion, but like Satoshi doesn't deserve 5-10 billion because he didn't do as much. Like, no, he has profoundly like created a way for humans to flourish, and potentially like have a way to go against the tyranny of the state. So that is like earned ownership. Like, there's a story to be said for earned ownership. And then early Bitcoiners who helped expand that, that technology, and they were like the first ones to really go after it and help like evangelize it. You can also say like they have earned a certain amount of ownership that the world should give them, some wealth. When you look at Ethereum, like, what is really the story? It's like, okay, there was an ICO, and then like people who were plugged in bought into the ICO, and then some like high frequency trading firms ended up like owning like millions of it. And so like, we should just let them, have $1 trillion asset and just buy everything. That's like a much weaker story.
Yeah, those are some really good points, actually. something that popped in my head, going back when we were talking about governments, was, I'm sure you follow him, Punk6529 on Twitter. He made a thread, I think yesterday, might have been 2 days ago, but anyways, it was, this is a possibility, and it's something I've thought about. But I wanted to get your thoughts on: are we too far along, and has Bitcoin and crypto become too mainstream, where there could potentially in the future be some type of government coordination where they ban all off ramps? You can't send your Bitcoin to Coinbase and then cash it out to your bank and things like that, as a way to just kind of kill it, I guess. Maybe they use, the typical terrorism or national security, things like that. Do you think this is a possibility, or do you think we've kind of grown just too big?
I think it's not even about too big. It's like you can't really do it to an extinguishing extent. You can imagine like you have bugs in your house. Maybe this is the government how it feels about cryptos. Like we got a bunch of bugs. Like we can like spray them and just try to like kill them, right?
Right.
So they say, okay, we're going to ban this thing, no off ramps, on ramps. Like we're just going to like so they start spraying this stuff, and then like you kill a bunch of them. Like you really you get 99% of these bugs, and you wipe them out, and that 1% it mutates, and it's like, okay, somebody can use a bug spray, we will like evolve, and then like all the kind of like future generations will adapt around like this threat, because they will have survived the threat, and then they will kind of like regrow, and they will be like built. It will be built differently. It will be built genetically to like survive this type of threat. So I think they kind of understand that, which is why like you don't see governments like fully just wiping the bugs out. There is something that will happen that will create a bigger problem for them in the future. It'll just come back, because the concept is so powerful, right? Like there is a fundamental reason for crypto to exist, and it is as a counterpoint to the control. It's like sort of like it's a sovereign individual versus like collective control, and there will always be demand for a balance, because if there's no balance, you just get like Soviet communism, and farmers are getting killed because they're trying to just keep some grain for their family and they're not giving it to the state. You have to have like some form of like control to some extent, but you easily overreach, and governments will always overreach. Like we see that in communist countries, like even in China right now. So ultimately they can't kill it. They might try, but it wouldn't even be smart of them to try. I think it'll go dark. Like people will move to Bali and Thailand and like other places around the world, and they'll just kind of coordinate, and they'll figure out how to make it like even more censorship resistant. So short term, yeah, like we might see some attempts, but I'm not even convinced that countries are able to coordinate on this stuff. Like if you look at geopolitically, like they're disagreeing about everything. Like are they really gonna all get together and say like, let's ban crypto at the same time, when the game theory says that the few people who don't ban it, they'll attract like a huge digital economy to the country.
Yeah, those are some good points. I just thought it was a really interesting little tweet thread he had, and in the back of my mind, that is always a concern, because they do want to protect the dollar, they want to protect their fiat. Anyways, just kind of possibly wrapping it up. I do remember earlier in the podcast here, you mentioned something about there might just be one more big last push or something of like a mega bull run. I was kind of curious, for those guys that are listening, they haven't quite made it yet. They haven't made the retirement money. They're not, flying around on the private jets, and they do want to make it in crypto. What are kind of maybe some strategies you would say if they got that? I'll just throw it out there, 100 to 500K. They're kind of sitting in stables. They're not sure what to do. What's the best way possibly for these guys to make it? And then once you do make it, and by make it, I mean $3, $4, $5 million, something like that. You're really well off. You're fine. How to keep and preserve that money and not go busto, using high leverage on shit coins or something like that, which we've seen time and time again. These guys run it up during a bull market and they're completely broke during the bear market.
Sure. First of all, 500K is a lot of money, and I wouldn't say like 3 million versus 500K. Like, you have a different life, and you've made it versus not made it. And like, I would kind of say like you're comfortable, and you're able to not do something every day that you don't want to do. Like, if you don't have to work at McDonald's, right? Like, you have like a bit more flexibility around your life.
Yeah, I mean that retirement money. So like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut in, but something like when we were talking about the 500 and 3 million, 3 million for sure, you can go live the rest of your life in the next 40 years out on a beach in Mexico or something. But 500K, you're still going to have to figure out what you're going to do,
Okay. I hear you. I'm personally like pretty against the whole fire idea. I think people are miserable if they're like not doing something productive and like, working towards something. I don't really believe in like 30-year-olds like sitting on the beach for 40 years. I could have retired a long time ago, and I'm going to be working forever. There's stuff to do. There's stuff to help people out and like
Right.
figure out. But in terms of strategy, I think like game one is understand like the bigger picture. So if you're going to be trading and you're using derivatives is a zero-sum game. Just by definition, no one's making money. Like, the exchange is making money. It's like even a negative sum game. It's like poker. You have like a rake. Like the poker dealer is like taking a little bit of every pot, and then like everyone else is just kind of playing against each other. Not everyone's gonna make it when you're doing that. It goes back to the poker thing. Like, the sharpest kids in their city are gonna like pick off everybody else because they know how to play the game better. So if you're gonna be like in the trading game, either like figure out like how to get like information faster than everybody else, look at it on chain, or try to find ways to have an informational edge. It's still officially legal because these are not like regulated securities. So if you get inside information, you can trade with it. Or just like, some people have figured out how to trade, right? They're really good at it. But, for normal people, playing a zero-sum game is usually not smart, right? Like, on average, you're going to lose because there's rake. The game that a lot of people can win is the spot. Like, spot is a different game. It's not zero-sum. Like, Bitcoin had a market cap of 1 billion and then has market cap of 1 trillion. There's $1 trillion being created. And if you're a part of holding that spot, you're gonna be able to participate in that, and that no one's like against you on that. Like, it's just kind of like a new asset that's being created. So, a way to participate in like the next cycle is just, not trying to trade leverage derivatives and stuff like that. Just owning the right assets. Right now we have pretty cheap prices in certain things. A lot of stuff is coming off a lot. Buying into like some of the assets that you ultimately like no one's sure, right? Like, Bitcoin, like I said, has security issues. Like, Ethereum could get like copycatted by something better, and has other issues. But you make some bets, and then you try to latch on to the next wave, which is like one more 10x wave that could be coming. And that's a way where like a lot of people can make it, and it kind of feeds on itself because you're in a way you're kind of like supporting the expansion of the asset class. So I would say focus on that. Understand like what game you're playing. If it's a zero-sum game, or if it's a game that you can more easily kind of participate in, and just allow the natural Metcalfe's law of like the network growing to add value to you.
Yeah, that's some good advice, actually. If you don't mind me asking, I know a couple of my buddies in one of my groups I'm in, I told them I was going to be, interviewing you, and do you guys have any questions? Not asking what you're actually holding, but what does a Jordi Alexander portfolio look like? Are you day trading, or are you buying large amounts on dips and then holding for a while? We were just kind of curious, like what you're actually doing, like your personal portfolio.
Yeah, again, like I'll answer the question. This is not like advice for everybody because I'm in a very particular spot of the industry. I spend my full time on this. I'm connected to a lot of people, and I do actively trade. There might be times where I'm like not long any crypto at all. It took me a while to accept that because fundamentally I entered the space on the like philosophical standpoint where it was like, I want to have hard money because I don't like just having everything in dollars. I don't want them to just spend it on like random stuff that, they want to build a wall in Mexico, or they want to ship checks to everybody. Like, I don't want to be like that, getting diluted by that. And I joined in a way where it was like, I just want to park my money in something that is, mathematically preventing people from doing that. And it took me a very long time to be comfortable with just being like net short, like not even like,
Right.
not even flat, just like net short. And I had to kind of accept that, there's two games to play, and I am like an active participant in the market. And right now I understand like monetary policy. I understand liquidity games. I can take a philosophical stand and just be like, I'm just going to always be long Bitcoin, have everything in Bitcoin and just like stack. Or I can, be a trader and say like, I think price is going to go down. I think price is going to go up. I still want to support the space, which is why, I spend a lot of time trying to educate people and like express ideas that will help grow the space in like a positive some way. But at the same time, for my own, personal portfolio, if the target is to like maximize dollars, because, eventually I want to use these dollars for good, I have to play the game. And the game means like, if I think the economy is about to crash and there's going to be like a liquidity crash, I have to go net short. So I do trade actively. I sometimes put like relative value positions on. I have like coins I keep my eye on that, like Atom, I want to be long. Like it's a solid asset. I believe it's going to grow. Something like ETC, Ethereum Classic, similar cap or in that region. I think it's just a dead chain. I look for opportunities to put on pair trades and just, tactically play that. So personally, I'm a tactical player, but I wouldn't suggest that everybody do that because it's so difficult. But, I have to say one of the benefits is I keep a very objective, neutral, open mind about all the assets, because I'm not like just stacking one asset where I just start to like lose objectivity about it. I'm always, thinking like, what's the thesis? How is this going to perform? And that allows me to avoid a lot of the biases that people kind of fall into.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. Well, I know you're a busy guy. I know you got a big debate tomorrow and you're in Singapore time, I believe. So you're way ahead of us. But I really want to appreciate you giving us your time. I know we're a new podcast. So I really, really appreciate it. I know a lot of my buddies were really excited for me to have you on. So a lot of people follow you. You give great advice. Please keep it up. Please keep the alpha up. Once again, thanks a lot. Hope to have you on again in the future.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Good luck tomorrow. Thank you.
Now, here's a word about our sponsor. Alpha DAO is an exclusive group of some of the top builders and founders in Web3 and all of crypto. The Alpha House is based in New York City, in the heart of Manhattan, and hosts weekly mixers where you can get exclusive access to the best networking in the space. Members also get exclusive access to deal flow, priority access to host events at the Alpha House, and so much more. Memberships are based on an interview process. So if you think you have what it takes, check out www.meetalpha.org and get in contact with us to schedule an interview.